Today we will be painting this red onion on art hot press watercolor paper, and the supplies. This is the reference photo and then the finished painting, and then a close-up of all the detail. I didn't add too much detail. I just added a few little markings on the onion. I tried to use most of the colors that were either translucent and single pigmented watercolors. Most of them are very translucent or transparent, but use whatever you have in your paint box or on your palette. Any color will do, any color that's very similar to the colors that I use for this onion. I mixed some nickel azure yellow and a little bit of yellow ochre for the roots on the bottom of this onion painting. I want to wet this section of the onion where this part of the skin stands up away from the rest of the onion, and I want this particular part of the onion to be very translucent. I actually want to be able to see through the skin of this part of the onion, so the colors will be very light and very translucent, and I'm not going to darken it too much. So I want to mix the colors to exactly the color that I want, and I think all of these colors were perfect. I mentioned all the colors earlier on the palette that I use for this onion that I am painting. So if you want to follow along, you can just try whichever colors you have, like I mentioned before, that you have on your palette. I'm very careful not to go outside the lines. However, I do move a little bit of this paint on the bottom layer of that skin, but I first wanted this section to soak into the paper and to stain this part of the onion. And then I just lift up some of the paint. Don't want it to be too dark, so just move some of the pigment and wipe it off on the little towel next to me. I just wet my brush and I use the pigment that I already added on the top of that onion skin, and I move it down to the bottom of the rest of this onion skin. This little section I want to be even lighter than the top part of that onion skin. So you'll see that I use a lot of water to dilute this color. And then I will just wait for it to dry, and I'm just picking up some of that color because I want a little bit more detail on the outer part of that skin. And I just move it around with my brush again just to smooth it out. I'm going to paint section by section, so I just wet each section. Okay, let's start again. I'm going to wet section by section and then just finish painting that part of the onion before I move on to the next section. Because the paper dries very quickly, I want to focus on all the tiny little sections that I will be painting. Instead of using a very big brush where I will wet the paper too much, I use a smaller brush and I just use it this way. This way is easier for me, and I just move very quickly over the whole onion just to layer in all of the first layers of this onion. And then I will wait for it to dry, and then I will go back to add in the rest of the paint. So we are slowly building on all the colors. So we're painting section by section. And with this tiny little brush, I feel I have a little bit more control over how much water and how much paint I have on my brush. For this part, I mixed in a drop of the Pearly Maroon. I just wanted a little bit more of a red tinge to the top part of the onion and to certain spots where I see a little bit more red than a pink color. So I also have a little bit of blue because I want to add in this blue color on the shaded parts of the onion. And for the right side of the onion, I really want to keep that highlighted section as light as possible, So I'm not going to paint over that little highlighted section on the onion, and I do want to keep a lot of the right hand side a lot lighter, much lighter than the left hand side. So this is a purple mix where I dropped in the ultramarine mix just to create that darker shadowy part on this middle of the onion. So this side is in shadow, and then the right hand side is where the highlights or the light part of the onion is. And then some of the perylene maroon mix on the middle part of the onion. And I just move it around, softening all the lines all the time. Again, you can use a much bigger brush if you are comfortable with it. I just find that I have a little bit more control with this brush. And again, I want to keep that highlight section on the side of the onion as light as possible. So I'm not going to paint over that. I added in Dr. P.H. Martin's on the middle part of this onion. It looks a bit strange at the moment, but you will see it will all come together nicely now after I've added in all of the layers. Just be aware that it is a staining watercolor, Dr. P.H. Martin's. It's amazing paint. It's just very staining, so when you use it, make sure that you want to paint that part of your painting, because some of the paints are very staining, especially this ultramarine blue that I used on the onion. For the top part of the onion, where all of those folds and crinkles are, I use a very thick consistency of watercolor paint, and I only soften it with a little bit of water after it's stained the paper. So I'm not going to soften each section. I'm going to paint in all the little darker sections, and then I will go back and just soften all of those lines. I also just darkened certain sections on the onion where I think I needed to darken some of the tonal values. So I will go back and forth and just add a little bit more detail, while still keeping all the colors as translucent as possible. So now I'm just layering another layer over all of these little markings that I painted on earlier, and you will see that this color goes very beautifully over the ultramarine mix that I've painted on for the Dr. P.H. Martin's. And I just lift up some of the colors. So now I've finished most of the detail on the onion. I'll go and make myself a cup of tea and then come back later and see if I have to add a little bit more tonal values or a little bit of darker detail on certain parts of the onion. This was the tiny little onion that I used as reference. I made it much bigger than the real life onion. The full tutorial step by step is on Patreon. The link will be at the bottom of this video in the description below. And I would like to thank each and every one of you following me on YouTube and liking this video. You guys make it all worth it. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank each and everyone on Patreon. I love producing these little videos and I like sharing them with everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon with another video.